Hi everybody, hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Zach and I'm the creator of Elementile. Now, as the creator of Elementile, I've introduced a lot of people to this game, and that's what this video is going to be. It's just going to be an introduction to the game, going over the rules, just like we were in person, very casual, but in video form. And I'm going to try and keep it as condensed as possible and as simple as possible, but I do want to cover everything so you're not lost when you go try to play the game for yourself. So I do apologize if the video ends up being a little bit long. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Let's start with the basics. What is Elementile? I kind of just have like a board out here in like a random position. But Elementile is a card game. You use resources to go ahead and summon units to the field and cast spells to support them in order to push forward and push to your enemy's front lines and take them out. If you deal 10 damage to your opponent, you win the game. And then beyond that, I think the best way to explain this game is just kind of jump into like a mid-game turn, go over what a normal turn looks like, and then we'll walk back and explain like how we got there in the first place. All right, let's begin with just this average turn here. You can see there's already a little bit of board presence. Both players have some elements, and I'm about to start what would be actually my third turn. So talking about the board state, the current board state, over here there are some units that are in the graveyard for both players. These are units who have already fallen, who have already basically lost all their life and gone off the board over the graveyard. We have a stack of cards in our ethereal plane, which is this stack here. And this is sacrifices that we made in order to gain the elements that we've gained. And over here we have our deck that we draw from at the end of our turn. So on the board, actual units that are impacting the board, there's 3 units. This one is mine because it's facing forward to me. These 2 are my opponents because they are upside down, although when I zoom into them on Tabletop Simulator, it will flip them over there. But if I zoom in like this, you can tell that they're upside down for me, so those are units my opponent controls. So that's kind of the current board state. Now, to begin your turn in Elementile, the first thing you want to do is you want to gain an element. Elements are the main resources in Elementile, and they can be used once per turn to pay costs of units and spells. Costs can be seen up in the top left, and there's a symbol that corresponds to each of the 6 element types. You can use the element once. Once it's spent for the turn, you can't use it again. And you can see like this one costs a light, this one costs 2 fire, and then the gray circle is 1 of anything. And here's an example of a card that costs some earth. And yes, so all the symbols correspond to the symbols on the element card, so that's how you know how you're supposed to pay for them in order to play them. So you gain an element by taking one of the cards in your hand, and as I alluded to earlier, sacrificing it to the ethereal plane. You put it face down here, your opponent can't see what you sacrificed in order to get your element, and then you get one of whatever kind of element you want. So basically you're just going to figure out something you don't really expect to use or don't really think you'll need, and you're going to go ahead and put it in the ethereal plane. It stays here for the rest of the game in most cases, so you will not have access to this card anymore after you make this sacrifice. I'm going to go ahead and flip this guy over, go to the ethereal plane, and pick up another fire element. So that's the first phase of your turn, the element phase or resource gaining phase. That gives you more juice to fuel your plays. So the next part is the summoning phase 1. So this is your first opportunity to play units and spells on your turn to impact the board. And I think the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to summon another Powerwolf Hunter. So let's go ahead and pay these 3 and place him right here. Now when you're summoning units, you can always summon here on your home row. So my opponent's home row would be this one closest to him. Or you can summon in any row where you control a unit. Or if I had this unit was up here, I can summon in any row that's closer to me than a unit I control. So if I had that Powerwolf Hunter up here, I could summon to these 2 rows. But I didn't have him up here, he was right here, and I'm going to go ahead and place him here. And I have one more fire element. I could summon this Powerwolf Pup this summoning phase, but I'm going to go ahead and hold off on that for now. So that's the end of summoning phase 1. The next phase in a turn is the activation phase. So this is when you move all the pieces on the board and have them do combat or any abilities they have or those sorts of things. So activating units for combat is a 1-by-1 process. So you can activate a unit and then that unit can use any activatable abilities or special attacks. If it wants to move, it can move up to its movement score at the top right there, the paw print. This Firewolf Hunter can move 1, and it can activate its attacks. Now, attacks are the arrows to each side. Attacks are directional in Elementile, so if I wanted to attack the skeleton with my strongest attack, I would have to move this Firewolf Hunter here and attack like that. If I wanted to move the Firewolf Hunter up to give myself more summoning space, I could do that, but I'd be attacking with the 2, which would be less damage. So when a unit is activated, you have to, if you want to move, you have to move before your attack, unless the card says otherwise. So I'm going to start by activating this Firewolf Hunter, and I'm going to move him forward to give myself more space, and I'm going to attack this skeleton. Now, the little shield symbol at the top right there is the armor of the unit, and the armor reduces all incoming damage by the value of the armor. So in this case, skeleton's base armor is 1, and I'm attacking it for a base power of 2. So under normal circumstances, I would do 1 damage to the skeleton's 3 health and the little heart there, and the skeleton would survive with 2 health left. But the skeleton has this attack token on it, because last turn, it attacked. Any unit that attacks gets one of these, and this lowers armor by 1. So actually, the skeleton has 0 armor, and this will do 2 damage. So my Firewolf Hunter gets an attack token for his attack, and this skeleton has earned 2 damage and is down to 1 health. So I've activated this Firewolf Hunter. He's done for this turn. Now this Firewolf Hunter was summoned, and units that are summoned, were summoned this turn, cannot move, but they can attack. So in this case, think of summoning kind of as like the movement for that unit for the turn, and then they're still able to attack. So in this case, the Firewolf Hunter only has 1 valid attack target, and that is this assassin here. So he's going to go ahead and use his 4 attack to deal, again, 4 minus 1 armor would be 3 damage. Now, Firewolf Hunters do have an ability where you can pay a fire element to increase their attack power by 1, and if I did that, I could clear the assassin this turn, but I'm going to go ahead and reserve that element for my second summoning phase. So we're just going to attack with 4. Again, my Firewolf Hunter gets an attack token here, and the assassin gets 3 damage, also going down to 1 health. And I have no more units to activate. I've activated both my units, so that ends my activation phase. After the activation phase is the second summoning phase, and on that summoning phase, it's the same as the first summoning phase, but units that you summon in the second summoning phase obviously will not get their attack, because we're past the activation phase. Basically, the time for attacks is over. So I am going to use this last fire element to summon a Firewolf Pup further forward than I could have before activation, because before my activation phase, my furthest unit up was this Firewolf Hunter right here. I could only summon the Firewolf Pup back here, but now that I moved up this Hunter, I can summon the Pup up here. So that's the advantage of waiting till your second summoning phase. You lose the attack, but you gain, you have the potential to gain more summoning space through your activation phase, which could allow you to summon things further forward. And now that I have spent all of my elements in my second summoning phase, I went through activation, I gained an element this turn. That is the end of my turn. So you end each turn in Elementile by drawing 2 cards. It's a good signal for the end of your turn, and in this game, all of your actions take place on your turn, so this just gives you extra time to see what you're going to draw and think about your plays while your opponent is going. So you just have extra time, no surprises at the start of your turn, and it's a good signal. So I'm ending my turn, I draw 2 cards. And that is a basic turn in Elementile. That's the flow of the game. My opponent would then go, grab an element, these guys would activate, do their thing, they'd summon units and stuff like that. So that's basically how the game goes. So how did we get to this point? If we clear this board just for a moment, let's go back to where we started. So the game of Elementile begins with each player having a deck. Nothing's on the field, we don't have any elements or anything, just each player has a deck. First thing you want to do is decide which player is going to go first. And because that's going to kind of decide the starting conditions for the players. Because this game is momentum based, you're trying to get your units up the board towards your opponent. That gives you more space and puts more pressure on your opponent. Going first is pretty powerful. to combat this, the player who goes second is going to be able to start the game with a free element. So they're going to have a little more of a resource advantage to defend against the first player's or starting player's inherent momentum advantage or tempo advantage. So that's first things first. So let's say I was going to go first, my opponent was going to go second. They could choose whatever element they please to start the game with, and then we decide on our starting hands. So starting hands in Elementile, you will search your deck for any one card that you want to put in your hand. A lot of times it's a good idea to pick something low cost to make sure you have an early game play. But if your deck has a lot of low cost units, you could search for something that the entire deck is built around, or a key combo piece, something like that. But if I wanted to play it absolutely safe, especially since I'm going first and will only have one element on my first turn, I could just take a 1-drop like the Pyrewolf Pup, go ahead and add that to my hand. So both players will essentially search for any one card they want, then they shuffle their deck and go ahead and draw up 6 more cards to accompany that first card that they drew. So now I have my starting hand here, and play begins with me, the first player, and I would take my turn as shown before, where I make my first sacrifice to get my first element, and probably start with one of these Pyrewolf Pups because they're the one play available to me. So I might sacrifice perhaps this expensive AoE spell, grab Fire Element, spend that, and summon it to my starting row. Alright, so now we've gone over the basics, the objective of Elementile, how you take your turns, what a normal turn looks like, how you get your opening hands, how you actually play the game. But now it's time to go over some of the more corner cases and special rules. And the first set of special rules I want to go over has to do with elements and special costs. So we're going to start with the elements. Each turn, when you end your turn, you may have some elements that you didn't spend. So like if I spent these 3 elements to summon perhaps this unit on my turn, then I would have this leftover light element. So each turn, when you end your turn, you can choose one unspent element and essentially overcharge it, which is flipping it over to its face down state. And now when it's like this, it can be used to pay any sort of element cost. So this light could pay a water cost, or an earth cost, or a darkness cost. It can pay for anything. But once you use it once, it flips back to its normal, more dormant state and is only a light element. Now, the light element is still a light element for Triversity and Prowess, which are 2 things I will cover in a minute, but it can just pay any sort of cost sort of temporarily. So let's say if I ended my turn and I just had these 2 unspent, I could choose one of them. So I could overcharge the water, I could overcharge the light. I can't overcharge both in one turn. And again, the second you spend it, it becomes no longer overcharged. So it loses that property. So if you want multiple overcharged elements, not only would I, on my following turn, not have to spend this one so it doesn't go back to normal, but I'd have to not spend another one. So if I only spent these 2, then I could overcharge this one, and then the following turn, I could have 2 overcharged elements. That's pretty rare, and it means you're generally not spending your elements super efficiently, but it happens sometimes. And the idea behind overcharge is it's kind of a trade-off for turns where you don't play to maximize your tempo. You're not using all of your elements every turn. You get a little more flexibility going down the line. You can maybe pay for some of your deck splashes without having to invest in like a full element of that type, or maybe you have a really heavy water turn incoming. You're going to want to play the banner, the water banner next turn that costs 4 water. You can overcharge your light, and then next turn pick up a water, use this as a water, and all of a sudden you can afford it. Where without the overcharge, you'd be 2 turns out from the water banner, that sort of thing. So that's overcharge. The next thing that I touched on a little bit earlier is prowess cost. You can see with the card juggle here, there's the little crystal and the ×3. So that is what's called prowess. And basically what it means is if you control the elements that are symbolized within the crystal and the amount of them that are denoted by the number, then you can pay this cost for free. So in this case, if I had 3 water elements, so if I grabbed another one of these, I could then play juggle without having to pay the 1 water element here. Now usually prowess is on pretty low cost cards, so it's not like you're saving a ton of elements, but it's just a nice little perk for going for specializing in one element and really investing a lot in it. On the other side of the coin, there's Triversity. So this little triangle symbol, you notice it's kind of a rainbow, and it doesn't really it doesn't correspond to any of the element symbols. It's kind of its own thing. So what Triversity is it's the same as the gray circle that we saw earlier, that is basically you can use any element to pay for it, unless you control 3 different types of elements. So right now I only control 2. I control water and light. If I were to pick up a fire element or something, now I've activated Triversity. With Triversity active, I no longer have to pay the little Triversity costs. So I could play Winter Mist Walker for just 2 water elements. I could do this and summon Winter Mist Walker. Otherwise, if I didn't have this fire element, if I didn't control it, then I would have to pay 3 to play this guy. So kind of on the other side of the spectrum from Prowess, which rewards players for diving super deep into a single element, Triversity encourages players to spread out and invest in multiple elements. So as long as you control 3 different things, you've activated Triversity, and there are some cards where you'll get a slight discount on playing them. So next up, I want to talk about the types of spells there are in Elementile. Didn't really talk about spells much in the demo turn we went over earlier, so it's a good thing to touch on now. There's 3 main types of spells in Elementile. There's burst spells, attach spells, and banners. We'll start with burst spells because I think they're the most straightforward. So burst spells are basically one-shot spells. You play them, they get consumed, and they go straight to the graveyard. So in the case of this fireball, you're going to play it, it's going to do some damage to an enemy unit, and then it's going to make its way directly to the graveyard and be spent. So those are burst spells. They always just go straight to the graveyard after they're used. Next up, kind of on the other side, is attached spells. Attached spells have to be attached to a unit that's on the board, so they stay on the board as long as the unit stays on the board, or unless they're removed specifically. But they stay for as long as they can until something removes them. So let's say this Firewolf Hunter was on the board. We could go ahead and attach our Berserker's Rage to it, and from this point forward, the Firewolf Hunter will have more attack power, and it will get penalized if it doesn't attack each turn. It'll lose 2 life. So kind of a double-edged sword here, but this Berserker's Rage attaches to an existing unit and modifies it. That's a good example of an attachment spell. The last type of spell is a banner, and banners are very rare. There's only 1 in each element, and they each cost a very heavy investment into that element. They each cost 4 to play. And banners actually just kind of exist outside of the field of play here, and once they're played, it's basically just a new rule. There's no way to interact with these or remove these. It's just something that's going to be an ongoing effect for the rest of the game. So if a player were to play Blazing Surge, all their units are going to have more attack power and more health for the rest of the game. So powerful ongoing effects that are not interactable, but it's in exchange for a huge tempo sacrifice because they cost 4 elements, which is quite a bit, and a huge element investment because getting 4 of a single element is also quite a lot. So those are banners. They're kind of like a special type of spell. And those are the 3 main types of spells in Elementile. So lastly, I'd like to talk about the types of unit abilities in Elementile. As you can see, there's quite a few different types of units and abilities in this game, so we're going to cover just like one example of each category of ability. That way, when you see these types of abilities, you can go ahead and have an idea of how they will function. So we're going to start by talking about the Firewolf Hunter. This is a unit we've already seen before. It has an activatable ability. Now, activate abilities, these can be used at any point when the unit is active during the activation phase. So this can be used before the unit moves, after it moves, or before it attacks, or even after it attacks. In this case, the Surge ability will increase the attack power of the unit. So you probably want to use it before it attacks so you get value out of it. Activate abilities can sometimes have costs, and they always have a number of uses per turn that they could be used. So this is per time that the unit is activated. So in this case, you can spend up to 2 fire elements to increase the Firewolf Hunter's attack up to 2 times, and that is how activate abilities work. Next up, we go to the Master Medic, who actually has a couple different types of abilities. The first one is an attack, and an attack is basically just another option besides the 4 basic attack sides available to the unit. So instead of using one of those attacks to just attack an adjacent enemy, you can use an attack ability in place of them. So in this case, the Master Medic has a First Aid Plus to heal his adjacent allies and himself, and that can be used in place of these normal attacks. Now, like normal attacks, after you use it, you will gain an attack token, and you cannot use this and then move. You would have to move and then use this ability, or just use this ability and remain stationary. So other than the fact that they do something different besides just inflicting damage to an adjacent unit, attack abilities function the exact same as basic attacks. All the normal rules apply. You get the attack token, and all the normal movement limitations exist. Next up are reaction abilities. So reaction abilities are split into two parts. The top part is a trigger, and the bottom part is an effect. Now, reaction abilities can take place on your opponent's turn as well. So it doesn't matter if it's your turn or your opponent's turn. Whenever that trigger is activated, then the effect will immediately resolve. So in this case, if an adjacent ally takes damage, then this goes off and we prevent 2 of that damage. Now, this ability only works the first time each turn that this happens, but not all reactions are going to have that limitation. So that is how reactions work. There's a trigger and then an effect. Next up, we have Jirok, the Skirmish Commander, and he's got another couple types of abilities. He has a movement modification, which is basically just a special rule regarding his movement. So most units have to move and then attack. He can actually break up his 2 flying movement before or after his attack. So he's one of the few units who can attack and then move out of the way. He could even move 1 and then attack and then move 1 back. I also want to talk about his flying movement. In the top right there, you can see he has a wing instead of grounded units have this paw print, which is a little more common. But the wing is very common for wind units. This indicates this is like probably the most, well, it's definitely the most used movement mod in the game, so that it's shorthanded by just this wing symbol. And what it means is that the unit flies, and flying units can move diagonally. As normally a grounded unit, like this medic, can only move like up, right, left, or down, as long as they're unoccupied. But a flying unit can actually move diagonally, and Jirok can move twice because he's got that 2 movement speed. So he can actually, he'd be able to go over here, he can move over here. He's just got a lot of flexibility in how he moves. So those are kind of like 2 different movement mods. One of them is very common and is just shorthanded by this wing symbol at the top right. The other one is actually written out in text the way other unit abilities are. Next up, we have passive abilities. Now, passive abilities are kind of as they imply, they're just always in effect. They usually have big scopes. They impact like the whole board or your side of the board or whatever the case may be. They're always in effect. They're just basically always ongoing. So in this case, if Jirok's on the board, your units get stronger as they move forward and attack. Next up, we have grave abilities. So grave abilities oftentimes will have a cost, and they can only be used when the unit is in the graveyard. So if the unit has already been slain and is chilling in here, you can actually pay this cost to activate the grave ability. And the skeleton's grave ability is to be returned to your hand and then can be resummoned or converted into elements or whatever you want to do. So those are grave abilities. They're just abilities you can use when the unit is in the graveyard. Next up, we have attack mods and summon abilities. I'm going to cover summon first because attack mods kind of gets us to the next row of units. Summon abilities have to be, they usually also have a cost associated with them, and they have to be activated while the unit is being summoned. So in the case of the assassin, if you want to pay a little more when you're summoning him, you can actually activate his ambush summon ability and summon him 1 row deeper than normal. So if you controlled, say these units weren't here, we controlled all these units and we're summoning the assassin, we can normally just summon him to these first 3 rows, but if we paid for his ambush ability, we can actually summon him up here and have the whole board available to us. That's how summon abilities work. And then we're going to go back to the attack mods. So attack mods are different than special attacks. Special attacks you use in place of your attack sides. Attack mods just modify your attack sides, kind of like movement modifiers modify the basic movement rules of the game. Attack mods modify the basic attacks. And they're some of the most common abilities in the game. And some of the more common attack mods even have these special like arrows. You can see on the assassin's left, right, and bottom attack, they have these little like broken arrows. And those refer to as piercing strike attack mod. Any of these like kind of broken arrow attacks actually deal armor piercing damage. So they'll go straight through the armor. Armor doesn't bother them at all. If the armor's negative, you still do bonus damage, but just Positive armor values are treated as 0. So if you have a really heavily armored unit, like an animated armor or something like that, you'll go right through his 4 armor and just deal 4 or 7 direct damage to the health. So that's a very common attack mod ability, and that's why it has these like custom arrows to represent it. So let's touch on some of the other attack mods that are in a similar boat. We have the Snowman here, who has a freezing strike ability. Units that are damaged, so actually it has to get through the armor and damage the health from any of these snowflake abilities, so the top, left, or right attack side, are frozen until the end of their next activation phase. And just to talk a little bit about freezing while we're here, freezing is kind of like the go-to CC effect in Elementile. It's pretty much like a full silence. It turns off all of these abilities, and units that are frozen can't attack or move. So they exist, and you can still use them to get you summoning space, but other than that, they're pretty much just there to take hits. They can't really, and occupy space. They don't really do anything else. They can't attack, they can't move. All their abilities are turned off, even the passive ones. So I said these were always in effect. This is the one exception to that rule. If Jirok was frozen somehow, then you would not gain any benefit from his charge ability, even on the other units that you control. So that's frozen, and this is freezing strike. This is one of many ways to freeze units, and that's a very common ability in water. It's one of the main CC effects in the game. Next up, we have Reginald, Knight Captain with range. So range is kind of as it implies. There's a specific range. In his case, it's 1 to 3. A lot of units will have 1 to 2, and then there's a unit with 2 to 3. It basically just the sides with the little target and bow can attack further away than other units. So Reginald, if he was back here, he could still shoot this Master Medic up here. And one more note on range, if he has like 3 valid targets in this case, you choose which one to hit, but you do not hit all 3. So in this case, you could shoot the Snowman, the Skeleton, or the Master Medic with his full ranged ability. If he had range 1 to 2, he can only attack these 2. If he had range 2 to 3, he'd actually have a blind spot here and can only hit these 2. But with range 1 to 3 on these attacks, he can shoot all the way across the board. And similarly, for this position, he can shoot all the way across the board. So that is range attacks. And last but not least, we've got the lethal strike attack mod. These scythes, they're kind of like freezing, but when any damage gets through, instead of just freezing your opponent, this will actually just outright kill them. This doesn't work for players, but it works for units. So yeah, if you're able to get this 1 damage to connect on anything, or the 4 in the back there, as long as it does 1 damage, it's enough to slay the unit no matter how many hit points it has, so it will immediately remove it from the board. And those are the examples of the very common attack mods in the game. There are more that don't have these custom arrows, but if that's the case, it'll just apply to all 4 arrows on the unit. Otherwise, the arrow will be denoted somehow with like these custom backs or something to make it clear which attack sides actually have the effect. And with that, that's all the special types of unit abilities in Elementile. So that's going to do it for the basic rules of Elementile. Now, I hope this rule explanation has been exciting and gotten you excited for the game and made you feel a lot more comfortable and wondering where you could pick it up and play for yourself. You may notice that when I've been recording this video, this has all been in Tabletop Simulator. We do have a full Tabletop Simulator set, just like this one, that's ready to go. And if you have Tabletop Simulator, want to pick it up and prefer this sort of medium, this is currently available. But from the beginning, we've always wanted Elementile to be a physical product. And actually very soon, like next week at time of recording, we're going to be launching on Kickstarter. And that Kickstarter is going to help us finish up the rest of this art. Not all of this is finalized art, obviously. Some of these sketches will need to be finished a bit, but also pay for the actual production run to get this into people's hands. So if you're excited about the game, if you feel like playing it, please check out the Kickstarter. I'll put the link down below in the description. And yeah, please consider backing us on Kickstarter. The team and I have worked super hard on this game, and we're very excited to finally be here. And hopefully after this video, you're excited to play it as well. So yeah, if you could, help us out. If not, no worries. Check out the Tabletop Simulator version. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing you all on the field of Elementile. Have a beautiful day.